Well, for the past couple of months, we have been learning all about Moses in the book of either Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers. And now we are in the book of Deuteronomy. Those first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Moses wrote. God told him the words to write. And of course, much of that, especially Exodus through Deuteronomy, was about his life and him leading the people out of Egypt and God telling him what to write for the law. And so it's been a wonderful time as we've learned about Moses. And he was 120 years old. You probably think that's pretty old. Very few people live to be 120 years old anymore. My grandmother lived to be 110 days. And then she went to heaven. But it is very old, 120 years. But Moses was thinking about all of those things that he had done all those years. And it's interesting because his life is broken up into kind of 3 parts. For the first 40 years, he lived in Egypt as a prince. Remember that? And then for 40 years, he lived in Midian, and he was a shepherd. And he married a Midianite woman, and he had some sons. And then God called him to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. So for 40 years, he roamed around in the desert. Remember? The wandering around. But he thought about all of that time when he lived with his, in Egypt when he was a little boy. And he remembered the palace and how beautiful that was. And I'm sure he did think back at the mistake he made of killing that Egyptian, and he had to run for his life. And then he took care of the sheep for his father-in-law, and he probably thought he would spend the rest of his life in Midian as a shepherd. But then God called him to go to Egypt and rescue the people from slavery and go into the new land. And then as he thought back over his life, he fell on his knees and he prayed, "Oh God, you have been so good to my people. Please forgive them for not believing in you when they should have and for complaining so much of the time. All those years, Lord, I tried to please you, and I'm sorry for the times I disobeyed you, but I understand that you care for me and you love me and your forgiveness is everlasting." What a wonderful prayer he prayed to the Lord. And while he was thinking about his life and kind of praying, God called him to come to the Mount Nebo. He wanted him to come to the mountain where he would speak to him again. God said, "I want to talk to you." So he climbed up to the top of this mountain, Mount Nebo, and God pointed to the land. There it was, across on the other side of the river was Jericho. And he said, "There is the promised land." So Moses got to stand on the mountain and see the land that God was going to give them. "I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that I would give it to their children and all the generations that followed." And he said, "See that land to the north and to the south? Look at the seacoast on the west and the Jordan River on the east." That was the land that God was going to give to the Israelites. Well, Moses looked at the land and he thought how wonderful and exciting it would be to live there. But God interrupted Moses' thoughts and he says, "Now you have seen the promised land, but you won't get to go in there." And Moses knew that. Remember, God told him because of his disobedience, he was not going to get to live in the promised land. But Moses loved God and he accepted that, and he was willing to do whatever God wanted to do, and he trusted God's decision. Well, shortly after that, Moses did die. And Moses was one of the greatest prophets that ever lived. He was the only one that God spoke to face. But later, God resurrected Moses and took him to heaven. Well, the people were very sad once Moses was gone. And they were eager for God to choose a new leader. And I'm sure they thought, what are we going to do now that Moses has died? How are we going to continue our journey into the promised land? But God had a plan. And God had spoke to a man named Joshua. And God spoke to Joshua and said to Joshua, Now that Moses is gone, you are the new leader of Israel. You're going to lead my people across the Jordan River into the promised land. Do you think that was a big job for Joshua to take on? Of course. And he probably thought, well, how am I going to follow in Moses' footsteps? He was a great leader. I don't think I could do as good a job as he did. But God knew Joshua's thoughts, and he had a very wonderful word for him. He said, be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, for I will promise to be with you wherever you go, just as I was with Moses. All you have to do is trust me and keep my law. Study the law day and night. Teach my people to obey it too. Then all will go well. So that was a wonderful word from God, to be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That's Joshua 1:9. And now God had promised to help him and be with him. Do you think Joshua trusted God? Yes, he did. And remember, Joshua was one that believed that they could have gone into the promised land way back when they saw the giants. He trusted God, and that's why God chose him to be the leader. And remember, Joshua and Caleb were the only two left that were going to get to go in the promised land. So they were probably one of the oldest there with the Israelites. But God always keeps his promises. And sometimes it might take a while. But God promised to lead his people into the promised land. And he is going to keep his promise, but with a new leader. And that was Joshua.